let's get started with the big news of the day. My man James Harden opting out. Let's react to it. I'm going to throw it to you, Rob. What was your main reaction?
Well, I got to say, my main reaction was the guy stuck to what he said he was going to do. I mean, in his final press conference, he basically said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to build a winner here in Philadelphia. And nobody really believed him. I don't think I really believed him. I was like, oh, yeah, an NBA player is going to leave $47 million on the table. Like, that just doesn't happen. As you look at LA with Russell Westbrook, it doesn't happen. But I think James Harden probably knows the end is near. He knows this is probably his best chance, last chance to get a title. So he's going to do whatever it takes. And if that's taking $10 million less this year, 12, whatever it works out to be, it's a great thing. And it tells you here's a guy who's committed. And I think the fan base is going to respect him for it. Now, with that said, he's got to come out and perform. He can't do what he did over the 33 games he was here this past season. But this was a great start to the free agency period, which will begin tomorrow. And I'm very, very eager and excited to see where the dominoes fall now that this one has taken place.
What about you, Austin? What was your first reaction?
The first reaction is that given Harden's decision, it sounds like he's going to take somewhere between $12 million less in the first year of his next deal. Given that figure, it doesn't really matter that the salary cap went up today because that was only going to give you about $1 million more in space. So Harden takes $10 and $12 million off in the first year. That facilitates you having enough room for not only the biannual and non-taxpayer mid-level exceptions, but it also gives you a little bit of wiggle room with trades throughout the course of the season should you decide that you want to make some changes.
I'm muted. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Thiago, what was your reaction? Now Thiago's
also muted.
Everybody's muted tonight. Yeah, if I don't want to hear what I have to say. No, I'm just joking. If you're a Sixers fan, you got to be excited, man, because depth is something that they've struggled to build around Joel Embiid. And now they're in a position to do so at a very high level. They also mentioned what it's freed up cap-wise and the amount of money they're able to play around with. You're talking about some heavy hitters, man, in that slot. So it's on Morey now to fill out this roster. There's obviously talked about PJ Tucker being one of the guys to slot into those figures, but I want to see who goes in and who goes out because I think that's going to dictate what the Sixers are next year.
All right, let's look at the mark. What was your reaction? What does it mean for this roster moving forward, man?
You won't find anyone more optimistic in Sixerland than me right about now. And I've been singing the same tune since the end of the season. Like I think a lot of people were beaten down by this year's playoff loss, and I've been there before. Like Atlanta Hawks loss broke me. Like the Celtics losses hurt. But like this one, our MVP missed the first two games and then was playing at 50% the rest of the games. And people want to make broad generalizations about James Harden's time on the Sixers and broad generalizations about the entire era. I agree with the first 95% of what Rob said and everything of what Rob said about James Harden taking less money. It's honorable. I mean, no one's going to give James Harden the credit because no one wants to give James Harden the credit, but him taking less money, let's just say it plainly. He opted out of a $47.1 million option. Like just saying that out loud, I think says everything it needs to be said. I know he's going to make $36 million. It's not like he's hurting for cash, but it's a big sacrifice to try to make the team that you play on better. And the one thing that I just want to respond to that Rob, the thing at the end that I disagreed with, I think James Harden can be the exact same version that we just got. And I think that the Sixers can go and compete for a championship. Now, what we need to think about with James Harden is he's not Houston Harden. What we need him to be is a top 25, second best player on the team. That's a point guard that we sorely needed before he got here, who averages over 10 assists. He's the only player in the NBA last year who averaged over 20 and 10. So his hamstring was cooked. It was falling off the bone. He averaged over in 20 and 10 with that hamstring that was cooked falling off the bone. So if he is healthy, then yeah, that would be amazing and they'll be even better. But if he's 21-10, Tyrese Maxey's a 21-year-old phenom on his rookie contract who's going to average close to 18, 19 points per game. And you have a guy who the city believes is the best player in the world who should have won MVP last year. I'm feeling great. Like all James Harden has to be, like, Giannis won a title 2 years ago with the Bucks. Chris Middleton was the second best player. Steph won a title last year, or this year now. Andrew Wiggins was the second best player. Joel Embiid's going to have to be MVP Joel, and James Harden just has to be, Chris Middleton, Andrew Wiggins level second best player. I think people get too caught up because he's James Harden.
Yeah. Can I just make a point on that? Because I agree with mostly what Mark has to say. I do think the Sixers need a better version of James Harden for the simple fact that their number one guy is a post scorer. And we can saw primarily against Miami what teams will do, and then lengths they will go to take Joel Embiid off the court. And you can erase Joel Embiid off the court by double or triple teams. You can simply just do that. So I do think they need to have a more aggressive James Harden as a scorer, as a shooter. And just the rerunning James Harden from last year, I don't think it's enough. And I think Harden knows that because he is focused on bringing back his best self. And I think the Sixers will see a different James Harden this year. I'm absolutely certain of that. So we'll see.
He had 13.6 field goal attempts per game with the Philadelphia 76ers. The caveat here is he was obviously trying to pump up Joel Embiid to win MVP here. But what did he have in the playoffs? And what are your guys' expectations with this guy moving forward as a shot creator and as a bucket getter for the Sixers? I'll throw it to you, Mark. Like, what do you think our expectations should be on this next contract for James Harden?
Like Chris, he's entered his version of the Chris Paul era. Like, I don't think people are going to be negative about that too, because Chris Paul is a famous someone who doesn't have a ring. So it's kind of the same thing as James Harden. So everyone loves to kind of crap on both of those guys, but they're both excellent players who are kind of, there's like 3 to 5 passers in the league that are even in James Harden's level. So I think he's just entered his own version of the Chris Paul era, and his numbers are still kind of better than Chris Paul. So even if you look at last year's, he's not as good as a defensive player as Chris Paul is. So it's a little bit different. And he's even still, he scored more than Chris Paul by a good bit last year, but that's kind of what I need him to be. I just want him to average over 10 assists. I'd like him to be a little bit more efficient, like maybe 34% from three, maybe a little bit better at the rim. I think he was 48% or so on twos. He was 55% on twos 2 years ago. So even if you just make that like 50 to 51%, like I think that there's minor improvements I'm looking for. But the one thing I do want to say is, like, Giannis is I know Giannis is his own type of guy who kind of breaks the mold. But, if we're saying Joel Embiid should have been the MVP, I think you can kind of say he's kind of the same guy where the Bucks figured out a way to win with a post player. Like, we kind of have to do the same thing. And I think James Harden being able to feed Joel in the pick and roll does that.
Yeah. Quentin Moore says 20-10 Harden would be nice. We have a Cowboys fan in the chat. And I'm not responding. But let's go back to keep rolling on James Harden and those Chris Paul kind of expectations. John is saying 3 years, 110 million. Is that official, Austin? Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's not official.
That's not official. All right.
So I think what it looks like is the first year. Let's say conservatively, the first year is $35 million. Let's also assume that he's going to get 8% annual raises on that. That looks like about 37.8 million year 2, 40.6 year 3, for a total of 113 million. And then there's the middle ground, which would be 36.5 in the first year, and then it's going to be a rising scale from there. So I think 3 years, 110 is very, very conservative, probably verging on quite unlikely. But yeah.
Anybody else have any comments on James Harden before we roll on to the other news of the day?
Yeah, I want to say that I kind of like we don't need Houston James Harden, but I would like to see a more aggressive, more efficient James Harden than what we got in the third, and maybe the hamstring. I don't know what it was, but the argument I was having with somebody online today was, he said, "Well, how can you look at the last 2 years of James Harden and think that's what you need? That's blind faith." Sports is blind faith. Every year is blind faith. You don't know what's going to happen from one year to the next. You don't know when Father Time is going to kick in on some of these guys. It's just a matter of being a sports fan. So if you want to accuse me of having blind faith that Harden could be a better number 2 guy to Joel Embiid this upcoming year, go ahead. That's what being a fan of sports is like. No, there is nothing for certain. There is no analytic out there that could tell you for certain that this guy is going to do this in this upcoming season. All you have is the current situation. And for the current situation the Sixers were in, for James Harden to opt out so that they can sign more guys, it is the best chance at getting this team into that title conversation that we had. So, yeah, I am going in with blind faith because that's what sports is. I don't know how you can look at it really any other way.
Yeah. All right. Quick comments from
that's not true. That's not true. I mean, Rob, the Cowboys, for example, they are we know every year they're gonna fuck up, right?
Oh, I love it.
Look, there's always every squirrel finds a nut, right? At some point. That's just one of the situations.